Okay, hi, welcome everyone to our webinar this morning. My name is Jeff Morris. I'm with Datacoral, and I'm sitting alongside Nitin Bose. He's the head of field engineering here at Datacoral as well. And we're going to talk about the top 5 requirements for AWS native data pipelines. Nitin, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you, Jeff. Morning.
A little bit of our background. I run marketing here at Datacoral. I've been in the software space, typically targeting developers for just over 30 years. Nitin has about a decade less experience than I do, but that's still a lot. And you'll notice our casual pictures there. My wife will be very excited that she's made it into one of my webinars. And we captured Nitin on a customer call. Thrilled that everybody has joined us here. And let's begin our presentation. So Datacoral, basically what we do is we deliver a data infrastructure as a service. We do this, and our target market is typically business analysts, data engineers, data scientists, those people who are working inside the data all the time. What we offer you is an intuitive SQL-focused programming interface. So it taps into the skills that you already have, and we handle the exercise of building and operationalizing a data pipeline. And the folks that we have on our team that are doing this have, again, decades worth of experience building very, very large scale data infrastructures, including that at Yahoo, scaling Facebook from terabytes to petabytes. We have members of the Redshift team here at Datacoral. We've got folks from Groupon, MuleSoft, Splunk. So let's talk about where we're seeing the world right now. There's some really interesting problems going on in the space, don't you think, Nitin? Right now, that number one, we're finding that there's the explosion of data, right? And this explosion itself is, I think, even more largely made problematic by the explosion of SaaS applications in the cloud, by the rise and rather fall of technologies like Hadoop, the continuing rise of new stars like Snowflake and many of the AWS tools. But there's a lot of tools out there.
Absolutely. And one of the gentlemen I was talking to last month mentioned we don't have a big data problem, we have a small data problem. And what they really meant by that term small was the volumes were not petabytes and petabytes of data, but what they have is a lot of variety. They have point and best of breed SaaS solutions, which are built from anything from payroll all the way to specific marketing. And you have to bring all of that data together to understand the health of your business. It's fairly tedious to be able to make this happen.
And the cloud has arguably made it worse recently in that it's all API driven.
Yes.
Right. This is no longer the world of ODBC and JDBC. That used to be easy when we had database drivers for everything, or common one.
Yep.
That was much easier, and that's actually arguably the foundation from which we're trying to build our infrastructure out, so that we are capitalizing on those decades-year-old skills that people have, but applying it to this new space of the cloud and all of these different APIs that the data sources themselves are requiring. And that's just the collection side,
yes.
Right? We're only talking a little bit of the problem here, or to me, that's the jacks are better to open kind of requirements to get in the game, is to support data ingestion in a common way. And we're going to show that, aren't we, in a couple of minutes when we talk about what Datacoral looks like. But oftentimes we see, when we talk to our prospects, right, we see the issues move from not only just that collection of data exercise, but then your typical or your modern day transformations, I guess I would characterize it, because again, the world has changed from a extract, transform, and load into a database or a data warehouse into a extract, load, and then transform inside the warehouse itself, because data's gotten so large, you really want to have it do your operations in place. And then there's issues around publishing, and then finally the newest generation of machine learning and AI algorithms, and the goals that folks have now of inferring information out of the data that they've got to help them make a prediction or an estimation of what's going to happen next for their business. That's sort of the hierarchy of needs we keep seeing. And what's really astonishing about this is that there's very, very few people here that are at the top of the pyramid.
That is correct. It's a pretty noisy space. It's not a crowded space like our CEO always likes to say. But truly, at the end of the day, what you're looking for is a platform that grows with you and can span each level of maturity that takes you all the way from just the old school BI reporting all the way through running ML AI in an automated fashion to be able to have actions being taken from the insights you're deriving, not just having a pretty dashboard.
Exactly. So yeah, let's look at kind of the complexity of today's world, right? Even just in that extraction exercise we were talking about, right? So connecting to the myriad of cloud sources and on-prem and legacy sources, they could be file-based, they could be unstructured data, that all kinds of things that have been evolving over the last decade or so. There's a ton of products out there that do data ingestion. And many of them do it really well. There's that we often like a lot. The next level of that, though, is then get that data into somewhere where it can be usable, like AWS S3, and we'll start to talk about some of our core requirements or the requirements we see of staging data in S3 to keep it around for posterity and make sure that you have a reliable original copy of the data that you can work with, allowing you not to have to go back to that source system over and over and over again, and attempting to minimize your overall traffic that you're ingesting into S3. But then we've got tools to load data into warehouses like Redshift or Snowflake. We've got tools to perform transformations or additional data movement around the environment. And then there's locations that you want to actually deliver the data so that it's to make use of it, right? Those are your typical your analytic tools, but oh my God, that market is changing like crazy too. Google buying Looker and Salesforce buying Tableau. Those I think were big shots across the bow of what's happening in the market, and that the visualization exercises are getting commoditized very, very quickly.
Absolutely.
And here's the funny part, right? Our favorite punchline. All of this mess is still a data pipeline problem, isn't it?
That is correct. And the common theme is the spanner and the screwdriver between each one of these layers. And even if you have the best of breed solutions, you do need to be able to spend engineering effort and operational effort to maintain this plumbing and pipelines. And therein lies the problem of not every team can afford to do that. And as things becoming more commoditized, you do need a solution which takes you end to end.
Exactly. So let's talk about, let's say, what we operate within AWS, and we follow, of course, their best practices around extracting, loading, transforming data, and getting it to a BI environment. We do so in some interesting ways, in which we're going to end up talking about in a second, being serverless, being secure, supporting end-to-end orchestration, being aware of changes across throughout the pipeline. Those, I think, are the things that, to me, really helped us define what those top 5 requirements for the environment are. But let's just let's touch on real quick some of the other funny complexities that we're actually dealing with. So our slice catalog, we have over 75 different we call slices, or our serverless microservices, what we refer to as our connectors. We'll explain more about that in a moment, but I just want to highlight that we've got over 70 of these different tools and systems already built out. And then I guess, Nathan, how long does it take us to build out or introduce new connections and new operations in the environment?
So one of the beauty of the Datacoral platform has been the fact that we've abstracted many of the complexities of building ingestion, publishing mechanisms. So we're able to actually have an intern who came in a couple months ago and was able to knock out a specific connector to bring data in within 3 days. I mean, that's kind of the value addition that we are trying to provide. And absolutely, this is clearly a smart individual, but they have not built the platform or do not know much. And this is one of the things we are trying to do is simplify each one of these components.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's really super cool. Okay, so what now? So if we describe the initial requirements as being AWS Best Practice ELT, let's talk about some of the other areas, some of these top 5 AWS native requirements that we also need to support as we go through this exercise of automating data pipelines. Number 1 is serverless, right?
Yes.
And this one I really appreciate. And drew me to Datacoral was the fact that we are really operating, I think, in the almost cloud 3.0 kind of era, where the original cloud was lift and shift your entire data center infrastructure into a whole bunch of EC2 instances.
That is right.
And then the second generation of this was, let's containerize it all because I'm over purchasing EC2 capacity to support all of these products. So let's try and optimize for that. And that's what Kubernetes and lots of the other containers, VMware, are good at helping support. But even that's not good enough yet, because AWS at the same time is figuring out how to either containerize or break down their own sets of services within Redshift or within the rest of their environment to offer the customer a better pay-per-use model. Is really the value that serverless offers. Is you actually are truly paying for the time that you're heating up a CPU. And that's it, right?
That is correct. And that actually has an inherent advantage. Besides the cost, there is no operational burden. You're no longer maintaining keys and access and OS patches and all the other minutiae which comes along with maintenance that from an infrastructure perspective is no longer a thing.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. So number 1 is serverless. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail too. Number 2 is security. And running this whole infrastructure, not in our environment like SaaS vendors do, but actually in your environment, like your IT organization wants you to do, right? One of the largest issues that we're constantly running into is customers worrying about losing control of their data.
Absolutely.
Especially in the era of all of these regulations like GDPR and CCPA.
Yes.
And supporting data privacy requirements like HIPAA. The best case scenario for a customer is actually to have the whole thing run within their environment and not ours. And so we'll talk about that one in a second as well. Our third one is orchestration, and this one might seem a little weird for people, but it's really part of the secret sauce of Datacoral, and it's also one of the things that is one of the pieces that we're finding our prospects are leaving out or forgetting about when they're building or they're taking on a data infrastructure, is the exercise of making sure it all runs in the sequencing that you want it to really easily. And our last one is going to be change awareness, because what breaks data pipelines faster than anything? Changes to the data structures, changes to the data values, some kind of screw up in a record.
Yes.
Right? All of that makes these data pipelines subject to failure really on a regular basis. And again, when we're dealing with that huge list of source systems, how do you keep track of when a vendor changes their schema or they changes their data model?
Correct, and you might be doing that yourself with some of the team adding fields to Salesforce or your product team adding new tables and columns to your database.
Yeah, exactly. See, so this whole notion of being aware of changes as they're happening so that you can either adapt to them automatically or anticipate that they're going to happen as you're deploying that change into the environment, so that you don't cause disruptions. That's a really big deal, and the fourth requirement we're talking about. And then my other favorite, the fifth one, is a lot of times right now we're seeing that the world thinks that the analytic exercise ends with a BI tool.
Yes.
And that's not really true.
Yes.
Right. And especially in the age of machine learning and other, in even those SaaS systems that we were originally drawing data from, we want to be able to publish data back to them. And I found in my career that that's an exercise that is regularly left to the customer to implement themselves. It's kind of like the final insult to even to the BI user is you've got something that is really useful and valuable for your organization, this refined data, this particular metric that you've just come up with, and you can't put it anywhere.
Correct. And often thing that happens is you have these intelligent metrics being calculated and they get stuck on a dashboard and a human has to consume it. What if you ask the next question, which is, what do you do with that?
Exactly.
What is the subsequent action you're performing? And is there an opportunity for us to automate that action?
Yeah, exactly. So that in a nutshell, that's our organization of the top 5 AWS-Native requirements for automated data pipelines. Let's dive a little deeper into each one of those and talk about how Datacoral actually addresses those things itself. So number 1 we said was serverless and operating natively inside of AWS. Of course, I like it because it is a very, very efficient pay-per-use model. We've had prospects and customers tell us this is exactly the reason why I want to talk to you, Datacoral, is because of your serverless nature, your cloud 3.0-ness, if you will. There's a really funny observation I've made, and I've been at Datacoral a couple of months now, but there's an observation of we're using a lot of AWS technologies to actually build this. So the comparison of, in that diagram we had a little while ago, of all of the different external products that customers might be using, these are the internal AWS products that customers are attempting to get their heads around. And some of them are nearly brand new, like Lambdas, and some of them are AWS originals, like S3 and EC2. But these are all evolving themselves. How do you end up keeping track of the changes in each one of these pieces of technology that actually make up a lot of the underpinnings of the Datacoral environment?
And therein goes all of the bandwidth that you have mentally to think about how to keep up with these technologies. You have so little bandwidth available now to go back and help your business to solve challenges with data.
Exactly. So we had one of the metrics that we like to put up is oftentimes it takes, how many data engineers does it take to enable a data scientist?
Hey, it's more than 3.
It's more than 3, right? Because and somebody's got to man the ladder.
That is correct.
Right. So the second one is securely running in your VPC. You own the keys. The data never leaves your control. And here's an interesting one: is we never see the data, do we?
That's correct. So the fact that it's serverless infrastructure provided as a SaaS service, but the best part, running within your virtual private cloud, gives you the ability to run the software, the Datacoral software, and always make sure the data stays within your control. So from an auditing perspective, from a compliance perspective, it's a huge checkbox. But also, the best part is, as the data flows through the pipes, it's always maintained in an open format, secure, but an open format. That way, if you want to use other tools beyond Datacoral, you always have the ability to do so.
So having that same flexibility that you expect, or the engineers themselves are anticipating that they get in the AWS environment with all of those tools that we just showed, you still have all of that flexibility available to you.
That is correct.
That's awesome. And it's interesting as we look at the way the market itself is evolving in this regard, is we see some of the SaaS providers that are supporting data ingestion, right? They're saying clever things like, well, we do take the data into our environment, but we only hold it in memory. We never store it, and we flash it immediately after it's gone.
Yes.
And you're still offering the data up. It's still crossing the transom.
That is correct. And my previous security partners would not allow for it. The data was too sensitive, and the fact that we would be pumping everything through that pipeline, talk about finance, talk about sales, talk about product, and talk about customer employee data, it was just not an option for a third party to actually house it.
Exactly. All right, so security in your VPC, that's number 2. And then now let's talk about orchestration, because I find this to be a really fascinating element of the Datacoral architecture and environment. Number 1 is the fact that we are helping customers organize their directed acyclic graphs. They're DAGs, right? That's and that's a fancy term for this determines how the flow operates within your data pipeline. From what sources, how are things getting consolidated, and how are they moving forward through the pipeline? Because the directed nature of the DAG is there's only one direction of flow.
Mm-hmm.
And then the graph itself is a wonderful visualization of how this is happening. Actually, even with regard to the example we're putting up here, we're showing information from the billing system, from the customer support system, from the web events activity that the customer's performing, and this is going to give us an engagement metric or an engagement score for that customer that ultimately we could write back to our CRM system or back into Zendesk if we need those kind of things to give us a better perspective of what's happening in the install base.
Correct. And if you notice, on the left-hand side is all of your source systems that are coming in. That's your raw data that you've replicated over to your warehouse or your lake. Now, on the right-hand side is the actual KPIs that you're trying to measure. What if this whole graph gets built automatically based on business logic? And that's really what we've done here is you focus on your business specifics requirements and the management aspect of how they all link together, when should they execute, make it all event driven, make sure the data is fresh, make sure the data is available before you run this graph is the secret sauce that we provide.
Right, and that to me is really cool, and the way that we're actually doing a lot of that is we've introduced this idea of a time label, right? And that's the timestamp of either when the data arrives or when the data was originated, and you actually have control over which one of those determines what that label is. And it's a clever way I found to chunk out the data in these microbatches so that you're guaranteed to get the right data and you're not breaking or missing spots in the pipeline. But even in situations where the data has odd arrival times or has odd record creation times, you can still accommodate that with the way that we work out these this time label clock capability.
That is correct. And one of the benefits of all of those equations is it's completely driven by events. So it's all microbatches, most important events. So let's say you have information coming in that's supposed to come in every hour. And there's been a database migration which happened. Now you updated a whole millions and millions of records, and that specific extract is taking a lot longer than you typically do. That's when you get into issues. All of your downstream pipelines break because they don't encounter partial data. The benefit of using events of, hey, I'm trying to pull this information in. I'm going through a lot longer than I usually do. Any subsequent process has to stop and wait. And that's where the Datacoral eventing mechanism comes available to basically safeguard all of this downstream logic that you have built up is no longer incomplete.
So you don't get dead jobs downstream if there is a backlog.
That's correct. And more importantly, incomplete information. And your CFO is breathing down your neck saying, why is my opportunity value going down so much?
Right, and it's actually a problem in the flow. It's not actually a problem in the business.
That's correct.
Right. Okay, so number 4 we're going to talk about real quick is that change awareness. And this is the ability for us to recognize changes in the schema of that DAG and each member of the DAG as it's coming forward, as well as supporting change data capture inside the data records themselves. And this ultimately, I think, allows us to prevent a lot of pipeline breakage that is usually the most popular culprit for what happened to, how come this report didn't run correctly? How come the data warehouse is down today? And it's, of course, always happens on Monday morning, right? This change awareness is a really big deal for what we're doing here.
That's correct. And this change awareness actually has 2 different variations. One is, let's say you're adding brand new tables and objects and to your source systems. Do you want to go and wire them every time your upstream system changes? No, you don't want that. That's just too much of a pain.
Right, but it's almost like you assign a data engineer to that,
correct.
Just to that task.
That's correct. And second is, this is the one which always gets everybody, existing information changing. Because some Salesforce admin said, oh, by the way, now I need to add 3 more fields to my opportunity object. Guess what? Now it needs to get replicated all the way over, and nobody's told you.
Oh yeah, my favorite one that I think most people will relate to is let's change. Is you decide let's change all the sales territories.
Yes.
And reassign all the sales reps.
Yes.
Right. That is like a catastrophic event that happens really regularly because the business leader demands it. Right. The CRO is like,
that's right.
We're going to do account-based marketing and everybody has major accounts.
Yes.
Right. That wrecks it all.
That is correct. Now, to deal with that, you're going through, by the way, this specific example that you have is what I had to deal with in my previous jobs. And we had to spend weeks getting ready for this massive deluge of events and make sure nothing else breaks. So yes, if you have a system which understands the fact that there's an upstream change, and whether you're adding new attributes, you're renaming them, all of those information just flows naturally through the pipes, then there's less effort for you to maintain and more time to be spending on what can I do with this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and what we're describing here is the screen that is for any one of these tables, right, is recognizing that it is actually flowing correctly, and regardless of the changes that might have been introduced, we're aware of those, and we'll even throw warnings if it's going to affect something downstream.
That's correct.
And you can see here as we map out that both that sequencing of how does a DAG get run and how often are elements in those microbatches getting run, and which ones work and which ones don't is a great example in this particular screen.
Correct. And the most important thing this visualization provides to you is ability to debug what's really going on. How much information came in at what point in time. If you take the classic pipeline vendors right now, you need to go dig through logs to get this information. Even the best of breeds that are coming and growing rapidly, they give you very little insight as to what is actually happening within the system. They'll pipe it into a log and good luck. Their debuggability should not be complicated, should not be hard. It should be front and center.
Absolutely, and that is one of the interesting things that I've recognized as we do talk to prospects is oftentimes they have multiple different sets of tools or varying degrees of support for these kind of native requirements that we're offering. The orchestration exercise only happens at one particular stage of the pipeline, and then you have to switch to a different tool that maybe supports it, maybe doesn't. Mm-hmm. You have to switch techniques as you just described of, I've got to go scrape a log instead of just having this information available on that.
That's correct.
Okay, and our last main requirement here is publishing. And as I mentioned before, I think the expectation right now, or up until now, has been you harness the data that you've got inside of your analytic tool. And then that's where everything stops, unless, of course, that analytic tool supports delivery of that information downstream to somewhere else. And we've got all kinds of newer vendors coming online who are talking about, well, I support streaming data, getting it in, analyzing it immediately, and then getting it back out into my production systems automatically. That I can understand where and why that's a big requirement, but oftentimes data pipelines are not as super real time as people think, mm-hmm. and oftentimes the exercise of where are you really going to put it and how are you going to do it that way is a trick, as I've mentioned before, that is left up to the user or left up to each customer organization to figure out by themselves.
Correct. And initially you'll start with the dashboard, which is great. You're able to get some data science going because you have data in a cumulative store that you can go across domains, which is great. Now, let's say you identify that you would want to optimize your target campaign audience. Great. How do you do that? Good luck. You're writing a job and exporting, importing into HubSpot or whatever other solution that you guys use.
Marketo or any of the new ABM solutions, Engagio. And
now, what if you don't have to do that? What if you can say, here's my campaign audience. Why don't you automatically go and update the campaign audience in HubSpot or Marketo or any other SaaS solution, so you don't have to worry about how do I get that last mile covered. You're really focused on what is my campaign audience.
Right. And I think that's actually really one of the cool points that we just blogged about yesterday was when you're able to automate a lot of these activities, what you end up getting is an increase, because you don't have to, your data engineers don't need to focus on the piping here or the activities outside of the data. They can actually increase their investment of time inside the data. And I think that's a really important concept for folks to get their head around is if the blog laid out that if a team is, let's say, 5 people, and oftentimes when you allocate the responsibilities of those 5 people, there's someone playing point guard like a basketball team who's determining where the environment is going to go in the future and what priorities does it need to take on, kind of like a project management lead kind of thing. You're very likely going to have 2 people, your 2 power forwards running around trying to make sure that the orchestration exercises all fall into line and none of the plates hit the ground, right? So they're spinning plates all over the place. Or I'm mixing metaphors, but that's still fun. And then you've got maybe one person operating inside the data itself, and you've got somebody else who's running around gaining requirements from the users themselves, right? So 4 people are working outside the data.
That's correct.
1 person is working inside the data.
That's right.
Right. So you've actually got a 20% time invested in data of that whole team.
That's right.
That's awful.
And now you know why your business stakeholders are complaining that you're not able to move fast enough, even though they gave you a 4-member team.
Exactly. So what if you were able to increase each member's or even just the whole team's percent time in data by, I don't know, 50%. You go from 20 to 70% of the time because everybody's got meeting and lunches. Right, that's a huge swing. I think we figured out that swing itself is nearly $500,000 of investment in the data simply by moving to a managed infrastructure rather than having one that you custom built yourself.
That is correct, and that is where now you have the opportunity and the bandwidth. Now, what can you do with that? This is really where data teams can become a lot more efficient, effective, and more intelligent.
Right, and so I'm glad we're landing on the customer slide here so we can kind of talk about how clever these folks are in doing these exercises. So Jive is a gig economy vendor who's helping retailers find and use trained and certified, stock people.
Yep.
Right, as they need them.
Yep.
So you don't have to have a full-time stock person in your store. That's expensive. That's you actually say as your stock goods are coming in from your distributor, that's when your certified stocker comes in and helps you and helps you unload and pack up the store.
That is correct.
That's a cool kind of concept, right? That's the Uber for retail kind of concept, right?
Absolutely.
And so what Sam at Jive continues to remind us is he didn't have to hire that 5-person team.
That's right.
And again, the blog post we went through yesterday, that the value of that team could be as much as almost $900,000 a year.
That is correct.
That's what he's saving.
And Jive is growing like bananas, and they would want to take all of that opportunity and the value that they've saved back and pour back into the business, and now they're driving a whole next level of intelligence with machine learning and AI, and that's really what is going to propel them further along.
Right, and that's another interesting one of accelerating your decision and data refresh cycles. Right, we've heard that a number of times from customers as well. As I'm able to make decisions faster because the data that I've got is significantly fresher than what it was in the past. So Jive's a really cool example. Greenhouse is another great example. This is an HR automation organization that's actually using artificial intelligence to figure out, based on the number of applicants that you have in your applicant pipeline. So they're building a pipeline too. It's just humans and not data.
That's right.
But they're dependent on the data pipeline to build to analyze the human pipeline to tell you you've got enough applicants in the pool right now that your next hire is in there somewhere.
That is correct.
And help you bubble that one up.
And one of the best things about Greenhouse has been they've been with us through their journey of growth for the past 2+ years. And most importantly, every single hire that they're making to the team is being a data scientist. Just imagine that. Instead of having to focus on the plumbing, then now they're able to get that value that they've talked about has been tremendous. And they've grown their footprint with respect to getting different signals and using information to better optimize their their customer experience, but also better optimize their internal engineering efficiency as well. There's many-fold use cases that they've actually ended up using Datacoral for.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think the last one is Front, who's an email collaboration environment. And they too are they're analyzing the data that's coming through in correspondence amongst a team, and then figuring out how to best optimize that information and apply it to what's happening in the business, the projects that are going on, or the customer communications that are going on, all of those kind of things. And I think it's really interesting that Cyril, one of their early quotes was exactly what you just described with both Giant and Greenhouse as well, is we're helping make them smarter, faster.
Yes. Yes.
So I think I'm going to start to wind down my portion of the of our event here. We'll summarize the kinds of things that we're able to do within our data infrastructure as a service. And this particular slide I like because it's kind of the reveal of the cleverness that we've actually built into the environment. So we deploy what we call our serverless microservices or slices. You can see where that name comes from when I often highlight the letters SLICES, right? And people go, oh, I get it, right? So, but the collect, organize, harness activities, those are the microservices or the serverless microservices that we're putting into a customer's environment that are performing all of these activities. But then the cool layer that we've really just described is that metadata store, the orchestration capabilities, the monitoring and alerting inside the environment, and then all of that optimization and change awareness so that nothing breaks. You're not surprised by things that are changing in the environment, which are typically going to break things. You're just able to handle and absorb that. There was a great, a really interesting operational win for us that we had a couple of weeks ago. There was one of our customers who was ingesting, it was something like an 8 billion row table.
That's correct.
And one record was broken.
Yes.
There was an offset, right? It was a special character offset that was locating it was a latitude and longitude, and then the city was the next field over in that one record.
Yep.
And it broke the pipeline.
That is correct.
They didn't know, right? They're just thinking, hey, the 8 billion records are coming through in the environment. Mm-hmm. We knew.
That's right.
And we found it and we fixed it so that the customer has the pure data that they're expecting without without the panic of, oh my gosh, something happened in the environment and I don't know what to do.
And that's been our focus, is to make sure that the consumption is the focus of data, not the management aspect of it. And the managed service that we provide along with the software will be able to provide that white glove level treatment of, hey, this particular thing is broken. How do I help you ingest more data? How do I make sure that you stay focused on using what you have?
Exactly. So I think what we should do right now is let's switch over to your machine, and why don't you show us what it's like to live in Datacoral a little bit?
Sure. Now that you see, this is just one of our screens in the application. So there are two things. One of the things you might have seen in the previous slide that Jeff was sharing was there are multiple ways to interact with Datacoral. We are an engineering first company, so which means we highly pride API level access, command line access, in addition to having a browser-based access. There are multiple use cases we can enable, but I'll show you a little bit of both. And so here I have my demo instance. It's running a whole bunch of ingest slices, which are bringing in data into the pipelines. And one of the things I want to do here is actually add a slice. I want to show you how simple it is to be able to bring net new data over into the warehouse. So I'm going to click intercom, and I'm going to call this a demo intercom slice that we are trying to add in. And thankfully, I already have a key that was pre-generated that I got. And all I'm going to do is literally click add slice. You're done. Now the pipeline's going to kick in. It's going to roll in and install brand new lambdas within your Amazon VPC. Then go reach in to your intercom's API and start bringing data over into the pipelines and land it into a warehouse. So the only thing that you have to think about is, what do I do with income data? Now, we have different connectors from databases, your popular databases from MySQL, Postgres, Mongo, whatnot. We also have connectors to a ton of SaaS APIs, which is where our team has built a tremendous amount of IP, ranging from finance to sales to engineering to operations to support. And from the third category is event streams. We actually provide SDKs back into whether it's a web, whether it's a mobile app, whether it's a server-side application that you're trying to instrument. We have SDKs to instrument all of your server-side components or your user-facing components. So now you can get live data directly from your source systems as they're happening.
And that sounds like that's going to be very appropriate for IoT-based kinds of applications, right? As sensor data is, you oftentimes want to have that live and immediate kind of response from something goofy, some sort of weird.
That's right.
As I said, sensor.
Do you really need to have to build all of these pipelines yourself and segment them? And that's where you actually utilize an SDK. And one of our customers yesterday actually picked up this SDK, and boom, in a couple hours, they had data flowing through from the web application into their warehouse. And now they're focusing on analyzing how many signups they had, which is fantastic, which is exactly kind of the story we want to have.
Yes, and it is incredible, having seen this multiple times now, of how quickly a customer is either able to come online, or even more quickly, how they're able to continue to extend their environment and bring in new data as they almost as they think of it.
That is correct. That's correct. And so what this also does end up showing, so if you notice, the intercom slices got added while we were talking about it. Mm-hmm. Now I'm done, right? So that's kind of the experience we want to have. Not to forget, in terms of ingest, we also have files we can ingest from, whether it's S3 or FTP or wherever else. The whole idea is to make the effort of bringing data that's needed for analysis as simple as possible. Now, great. Now that you have data, what are you going to do with it? So let's go into your typical data engineer, data scientist life. They would want to go run a whole bunch of SQL, figure out what they would want to do with that information. And here is just an example of a SQL that they end up writing. Somebody said, hey, I want to know how much pending contracts which we have not invoiced, which we already have. Great. So this poor intern who was data analyst ended up writing this query within 5 minutes of that request coming in. Mm-hmm. Great. So now you want to take this and make that available as a standard dashboard metric, or a metric that drives behavior for the finance analyst team to be able to go chase them.
Right.
I don't want to go talk to an engineer. I just need to be able to take this SQL and then put it into the system. Great. You know what? Let's just do that right now. I'm going to switch into my CLI mode now. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm showing you the CLI mode is because you can automate all of these things through your actual CI/CD pipelines. You're no longer dependent on a browser which is stuck in boxes and arrows. You can actually program the entire pipeline. So what you'll see here,
and that's actually one of the ironies of this, is the data engineers really like this.
Yes.
A lot. You still get to full control over the behavior of the environment through the CLI.
Correct. And so what you've done is taken that exact same SQL that you had, put it into the structure. You added a few comments up top just to be able to illustrate how you want this to behave. And what we're saying is, I want this to run every 2 hours. I want this to pretty much recalculate every single time, and I'm giving it a name and a schema. Now I'm ready to go. So all I'll be doing is running this command, which you could have automated into your Git flow, where somebody, there's an analyst who authored the particular SQL that was trying to be produced. There's a data engineer who looked at it and says, yes, this looks good. This is not goofy. I would want to then approve this change request or pull request. Now there's a system which took your pull request and then automatically created your views. Mm-hmm. How cool is that? And this is precisely what our customers do today. And their scientists and analysts are focused on collaboration, which is a real pain point with just browser-based tools, which do not allow for you to interact with each other.
Right, and we've seen customers when we've gone and visited them, they put this up on the big screen, and they're like, "Look at how I don't really want to tell you how clever my function is here that I just put in, but I kind of want to brag about it."
That's right. And so while we're talking about it, this thing got created. It now is available on my application. See that? So that's pending. We just added it, and now it's going to schedule to be run. So the best thing is it's going to wait for all of its dependencies. In this case, it's waiting for invoices and orders to come through, and it knows it needs to go and run after each of these things successfully finish.
Right, and it's not going to create garbage runs if it doesn't finish.
That's right. So let's just go back and look at something that was done prior. This is lifetime value. This is something that has been running consistently every 2 hours, similar to this guy, and it's able to get data from the same tables. And the best part is it's actually managing the flow and the execution and orchestration that we talked about. If, invoice for some reason is taking a lot longer to run and finish, or it failed, the lifetime value actually stops and waits for that net new data to become available before it ends up running. So the management aspect becomes a lot easier for you as a team to only focus on the what versus the how.
Right, and there's an interesting observation that we've made here too, is that you actually have control over how fast or how slowly your data pipelines flow. And that actually has a monetary value that you can apply to that, right? Because whatever's happening in your AWS environment when you're making the CPUs hot, right? That's that's when they're charging you for activity. So if you're finding that your AWS environment is, its costs are running out of control, you can actually throttle how frequently the data pipelines operate in order to manage that cost benefit, right? Is if it's expensive to run, then run it less frequently. It'll be less expensive to run. And if the users aren't minding that they're not getting things every 5 minutes, it's taking every 15.
Bingo.
But you've just saved 3x on the frequency of runs. That also is a control a control lever that you have in this environment.
Correct. So you can actually tune at the individual table object level how often you'd want to bring data over and what mode you would want to bring data over and what it does. So there's a whole lot of detail that's beneath it. And if you notice here, actually have different modes. Some of them are incremental, some of them are bringing snapshot, in other words, all data all the time. It ends up merging. There's a whole lot of complexity that's abstracted away. It's for a subsequent webinar that we'll end up doing to show the full featureness of the whole pipeline. About
right.
You can actually control the dials to the extent that you'd want to without having to worry about writing code to make that happen.
Right. That's really, really cool. And the ability. So this to me explains oftentimes when we hear customers say, after I installed Datacoral, my AWS bill actually went down.
That's right.
Right. And it's not only is it because of the original serverless requirement we put up at the beginning, but it's also because of these little levers that you have under your control.
Correct.
To summarize what we've really gone through, and apologies for not organizing this in the top 5 list, but you'll recognize it very, very quickly, is what we've done here in this AWS native data infrastructure as a service. We're using SQL as the constant and as the data programming language that somebody is using to operate the pipeline and work within the pipeline, even though the data interfaces are no longer super SQL based like the ODBC and JDBC world that we grew up in. We're eliminating a lot of those unpredictable costs. We're helping eliminate and dramatically improve the reliability of data pipelines, and you allow your high skill and high value workers, your data scientists, your data engineers, to increase their % time investment in data. That's to me a really a huge deal. And how we're doing it is this serverless architecture, which is very cost effective. We spent a lot of time on that. The security and confidence you gain in running it in your own VPC. Its ability to support exactly what AWS and the larger organizations anticipate and expect you to do, a modern cloud-centric ELT and publish kind of environment, and then handling that as a managed service, right? The exercises of orchestration, of change awareness, and of publishing. If you've got questions, please write them down now. And if you've got additional curiosity, please go to datacoral.com, subscribe to our blog, and you will also be notified of when Nitin and I are doing another topical presentation like this. But I think I'm going to, we'll take one question here is, how is it that you price or you charge for your environment?
So ours is completely based on simplifying, just the way we simplify data pipelines, also simplifying the pricing structure. We have just literally two variables that go into the equation. One is the number of integration points, number of slices, which just...
Because we have to babysit them.
Correct. We just have to be able to run, operate them, and rather manage that infrastructure for you. And the second piece is how much data is flowing through the pipelines. And that's really it. If you're able to come up with those things, which are fairly simple, I'm sure you can have this at the back of your back of a napkin that you already have, then that's really the information that we have. It basically is a flat tiered pricing that goes month on month, where you're able to have predictability towards what your bill's going to be.
What the data pipeline costs are going to be.
Absolutely.
And then the flow is actually a cost that occurs in your own AWS bill.
Yes.
Right. So you determine and control all of that as well.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's I think that's a fantastic way, I think, for us to close out the event. Thank you again for the demo and for the discussion. Thank you again and for your attendance, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.